Wilson, what can you tell us about the known facts of the crash? Speed, behavior. What do you know?
Well, let me start off by saying this is a very tragic and sad day in this community. A woman lost her life. Another person perhaps lost his career and is perhaps going to prison. This was a very, very ugly day yesterday morning.
How do you feel about the bail being set at $150,000 instead of $1 million?
You know, a bail is determined by a judge, and the judge heard both arguments from both sides, and I respect the judge's decision.
Do you have any details on the victim as of right now?
I believe it's a 23-year-old female. I don't believe she's married or has children.
What message does this bring out that he hired a high-profile attorney, he has a clean record, but he will most likely make bail and be free until, he has to come back to court again?
Life is about choices. Mr. Ruggs made a choice. And the difficulty I have is there's so many alternatives. There's ride sharing. There's a designated driver. There's a taxi. There's so many alternatives. But Mr. Ruggs made a choice. And he's going to have to live with the consequences.
Sir, how's the family dealing with this right now? I know it's got to be extremely difficult.
I just met the family this morning. The family's torn apart, as anybody would be. This was a terrible, terrible collision. So they're mourning their loss. They're grieving. They're mad. They have all of the emotions you would think a family would have.
Have you heard anything about them race or racing, or do you think Mr. Ruggs was driving on his own? Do you know any of those facts?
This is an ongoing investigation. This accident, this collision, just occurred 2 days ago. So it's an open investigation. Metro's investigators are still investigating all of the facts. My understanding is there may have been other people with Mr. Ruggs earlier in the evening, and all of those things are going to be looked into.
What do you think his attorney's motive is to hold their own investigation?
Attorneys have jobs to do. I've done a number of cases with a number of lawyers. Mr. Ruggs has good lawyers. They have the right to conduct their own investigation. Let them. But we've conducted our investigation, and the facts are pretty strong at this point.
The police said suspected of impairment. Can you elaborate on that? Is it suspected alcohol?
There's no more suspect anymore. There's no more suspicion. His blood alcohol level came back at 0.16. That's twice the legal limit. Mr. Ruggs made a choice to drive while under the influence and be twice the legal limit.
Both Mr. Bowman and Justice of the Peace said that this was one of the fastest speeds that they had seen in their career. Is this also an incredible...
I've never seen a case in my 41 years here in Las Vegas of a person who's charged with a crime driving in excess of 150 miles an hour.
Sir, obviously Ruggs is a football player of the local team. Are you looking to make an example and show that even though you're of that status, you're not above the law in any case like this?
Mr. Ruggs is no different than anybody else. Whether you're an athlete, whether you're a police officer visiting from out of state, whether it's you, Kyle, I don't care. Like I said before, it's about choices. And if somebody chooses to drive while under the influence and drive in excess of 150 miles an hour, we're going to seek justice. This community needs to understand that driving while impaired is a serious matter. Like I said in the beginning of this conference, this is a tragic and sad day. It's a tragedy because a woman lost her life, and a lot of other people are suffering. It's also sad and tragic that Mr. Ruggs is potentially losing an entire career and facing a stiff prison sentence. That's the message. The message is use an alternative. Make a good choice. Don't drink while impaired. I'm sorry, don't drive while impaired.
Do you believe the prosecution is going to go forward in trying to prosecute Mr. Ruggs for the gun charge?
We're exploring that right now. It's only a 2-day-old investigation. The evidence shows that a handgun was found on the floorboard where Mr. Ruggs was driving, so we are going to explore that charge.
Can you elaborate on that? Do you know if it was in a case or if it was just unsecured?
I don't have that information.
Mr.
Mr. Wilson, seems like we're always talking about the same issue. Is there anything else we can do? Perhaps harsher penalties for these type of offenses? Seems like it's a nonstop problem here.
Well, we tried. Months ago, we filed murder charges in a case very similar to this, where there was excessive and reckless driving. But the Nevada Supreme Court said that was inappropriate, and we accept that. But there is the next legislative session. Because think about the behavior in this case and so many other felony DUI death cases. A person makes a choice minutes or hours before the collision to consume alcohol and then drive recklessly. That person faces a lesser punishment than a person who's convicted of murder, who may decide to kill somebody in just a few moments. So in my opinion, we need to look at increasing the punishment for felony DUI cases.
Are you able to identify the victim yet?
No.
Do you know where Mr. Ruggs was coming from?
The evidence suggests that he was coming from Top Golf, and then I think that there's some evidence to suggest after Top Golf they went over to a friend's house, but I'm not positive.
There was mention that there might be charges filed for his female passenger. Do you know if we're going to be moving forward with that?
Yes, it's my understanding that she suffered what is called under the law substantial bodily harm. We are reviewing the evidence right now. If it qualifies, there will be a second felony DUI charge.
Mr. Attorney, does she face any criminal culpability in this case?
No.
Would you identify her as her relationship with Mr. Ruggs?
It's my understanding she was his girlfriend.
Do they have a child together?
It's my understanding they do.
And the judge, would that be the same judge, the same child that the judge referred to as a 3-year-old?
I'm not sure.
Thank you.
So also we did notice that he was in a wheelchair. Can you talk about the extent of his injuries?
I understand he sustained some leg injuries. I'm not familiar with any of the specifics.
Can you elaborate on the injuries that his girlfriend received?
I've been told that she had a significant wrist injury that required surgery, but I'm not positive.
And right now he has DUI resulting in significant bodily harm and reckless driving resulting in death.
You have to understand, he's only been arrested and booked. Next Wednesday, you will learn what charges are filed. We are looking at charging him with 2 counts of felony DUI and an account of reckless driving. And we're exploring whether or not the evidence supports any charges with regard to the gun.
Can you explain the rationale for the second DUI charge?
Yes, the law says if you drive while under the influence and cause either death or substantial bodily harm to another person, it's a separate count. So the passenger in his car, who was maybe substantially bodily injured, that may give rise to the second count.
What's the punishment range for those offenses?
2 to 20 years in prison.
For reckless and DUI?
No, reckless is 1 to 6. Felony DUI is 2 to 20 each.
Is that with enhancements? Or?
No, there is no enhancement. It's felony DUI causing death or substantial bodily injury. So for the young woman that lost her life, that's 1 count. For the passenger, that's a potential second count.
There was mention that
It's like law school, I'm educating.
there was mention that he was uncooperative towards police. Can you elaborate on that? What was his demeanor when
I've read
police?
that he wasn't the most cooperative person while at the hospital, but I'm not going to elaborate.
Are you able to just recap, given the charges we're considering, what would be the minimum total and the maximum total charge years he's facing?
Well, the minimum would be 2 years. The maximum would be 46. And that could increase depending on whether we file an additional charge involving the gun.